In the grand grim tapestry of the Imperium of man, woven from threads of sacrifice, war, and fading glory, there are legends that shine with the brilliance of dying stars, and secrets that fester like a poison in the soul. No saga embodies this duality more completely than that of the First Legion, the Dark Angels. To speak their name is to invoke images of primogeniture, of unparalleled honor, and of a legacy forged in the very fires that birthed the Imperium. They are the Emperor's heralds, the archetypal space marines, the template upon which all others were formed. For 10,000 years they have stood as stoic, unyielding bastions against the encroaching darkness, their emerald green and bone-white armor, a symbol of unwavering loyalty. This is the image they have meticulously crafted, a fortress of perception, as unbreachable as their own mobile monastery, the Rock. But a fortress, no matter how formidable, is built to protect something within. And within the heart of the Dark Angels, behind the stoic masks and the solemn oaths, lies not a treasure, but a wound that has never healed, a shame so profound, so corrosive, that it has defined their every action, their every thought, their every breath for 100 centuries of unending war. Their history as presented to the wider Imperium is a litany of glorious crusades and impossible victories. They were the vanguards of the Great Crusade, the lion's blades that carved a path for humanity's dominion across the stars. They were the exemplars of tactical brilliance, their specialized wings, the dreaded Deathwing, the swift Raven Wing, operating with a synergy that other legions could only dream of. In the present grim age, their battle prowess remains undiminished. Where the Dark Angels make war, they bring a cold and total annihilation, a methodical erasure of the Emperor's foes that is both terrifying and awesome to behold. Their halls within the Rock, a colossal shard of their shattered homeworld, echo not with boisterous celebration, but with the quiet hum of perpetual readiness and the soft cadence of chanted litanies. The air is thick with the scent of ancient stone, sanctified incense, and the palpable weight of history. Their battle standards are heavy with honors, each one a testament to a world saved, a rebellion crushed, an alien empire brought to ruin. They are the very picture of space marine nobility knights in ceramite armor sworn to the defense of mankind. Yet for those who have fought alongside them, a disquieting pattern emerges from the annals of their long and storied service. There is a coldness to them, a distance that transcends mere martial discipline. They are an island unto themselves, isolated by a self-imposed secrecy that borders on paranoia. An inquisitor seeking access to their deepest archives will be met with polite but immovable refusal. A chapter master of a fellow Adeptus Astartes chapter, even one forged from their own gene seed, will find his questions about their internal structure deflected with unnerving skill. This isolation is most starkly and often tragically demonstrated on the battlefield. There are countless records filed away in the dusty vaults of the Administratum of Dark Angels chapters, abruptly abandoning a critical war zone. They will be on the cusp of a shared victory, fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Imperial Guard or other space marines when a coded message, a fleeting whisper across the void, will cause them to redeploy with a speed that defies all strategic logic. They leave their allies to be slaughtered, they abandon worlds to their fate, they break oaths of alliance without a word of explanation. They vanish into the void, chasing a phantom that is to them more important than the fate of 1 billion souls, more pressing than the commands of a Lord High Commander of the Imperium. Their allies call it betrayal. Their detractors call it arrogance. The Dark Angels call it simply the mission. This singular, all-consuming purpose is the key. To truly comprehend the sons of Lionel Johnson, one cannot simply look to the wars they have won for the Imperium. Those are but a fraction of their story, a public performance of loyalty that masks a far more private obsession. One must look to the wars they have fought for themselves. One must delve into the silence that hangs in their halls and decipher the meaning in the hooded, watchful gazes of their inner circle. One must understand that for 10 millennia, the Dark Angels have not been fighting for glory, nor for honor, nor even for the Emperor in the way that others do. They have been fighting for absolution. They have been engaged in a relentless galaxy-spanning hunt, a clandestine war waged in the shadows against an enemy born from their own blood. To understand the First Legion, one must look past the shining facade of the noble knight and see the tormented soul of the jailer, the confessor, and the executioner. For the story of the Dark Angels is not written in the light of their victories. It is etched into the darkness of their eternal, unforgivable shame. To comprehend the depth of the fall, one must first witness the heights from which it began. Let us cast our gaze back across the gulf of 10,000 years to an age of glorious becoming, when the galaxy was young with promise, and the Imperium was a searing blade of progress cutting through the dark. This was the era of the Great Crusade, and at its very forefront, its tip of the spear was the First Legion. Before they were the Dark Angels, they were simply the first, a title that needed no embellishment. They were the prototype, the Emperor's own handiwork, and they carried the weight of that honor with a stoic and terrible pride. Their martial philosophy was codified in a complex system known as the hexagrammaton, dividing the legion into 6 specialized wings, each a master of a particular aspect of warfare, a living library of martial disciplines that no other legion could fully replicate. Among these, none were more feared nor more whispered of in awe and terror than the Dreadwing. They were not conquerors, they were exterminators. The silent reapers who followed in the wake of battle, tasked with ensuring that nothing of a foe's tainted culture, forbidden knowledge, or hostile biology could ever rise again. Clad in sable armor, the members of the Dreadwing were granted a unique and terrifying dispensation to wield weapons from the dark age of technology archaeotech, so potent and so utterly forbidden that their very existence was a heresy to the nascent mechanicum. They were the bearers of phosphex and vortex fire, of strange radiation projectors and molecular acid shells. When the Dreadwing was unleashed upon a world, they did not merely defeat its armies, they unmade it. They scoured continents down to the bedrock-burned atmospheres into poisonous new compounds and left behind not ruins, but a sterile, silent sphere of obsidian glass and grey ash, a permanent monument to the folly of defying the Emperor of mankind. They were the Legion's final chilling statement in any argument. Where the Dreadwing was a scalpel of absolute annihilation, the Stormwing was the hammer of overwhelming force. They were the heart of the Legion's main battle line masters of the massed infantry assault and irresistible firepower. To witness the Stormwing deploy was to see a force of nature given form and purpose. Thousands upon thousands of legionaries advancing in perfect, implacable lockstep, their bolters roaring in a single deafening chorus, a storm of fire and righteous fury that swept away armies and shattered fortress walls. They were the embodiment of the Crusade's raw power, the inexorable tide of imperial compliance that broke upon the shores of 1,000 alien worlds and left them utterly subjugated. They were the glorious image of the Space Marine that would inspire humanity for millennia, the ironclad saviors descending from the heavens to deliver mankind. It was under the personal command of their primarch, the formidable and brooding Lion L. Johnson, that the true genius of the First Legion was revealed. The Lion was a strategist without peer, a mind that saw war as a multi-layered equation of logic, force, and will. Consider the subjugation of the Soroshian theocracy, a Xenos empire whose void kraken fleets had humiliated 3 separate imperial expeditionary forces. Where others saw an unsolvable puzzle, the Lion saw only variables to be manipulated. He did not meet their fleet in a head-on collision. Instead, his Raven-Wing masters of reconnaissance and swift assault darted behind enemy lines not to attack, but to merely observe, becoming ghosts in the sensor nets of the Soroshi. For 2 years, they gathered data mapping every patrol route, every supply shipment, every flicker of energy from the enemy's hidden command nexus. Then, in a single, perfectly coordinated strike, the Lion's plan unfolded. The Deathwing, his elite cadre of Terminator-armored veterans, teleported directly into the heart of the Theocracy's sanctum, slaying their priest-kings before they could even raise an alarm. Simultaneously, the Stormwing launched a dozen diversionary assaults, pinning the now leaderless enemy fleets in place. And as the Saroshi fell into chaos, their empire crumbling from the head down, the Lion unleashed the Dreadwing, not on their fleet, but on their sacred spawning worlds, broadcasting the silent, glassy aftermath across all enemy channels. The Saroshian will to fight did not break. It evaporated. The war was won not by attrition, but by a single flawless and utterly ruthless strategic stroke. This was the way of the First Legion. They were not just warriors. They were the architects of victory, the Emperor's ultimate sanction, the very standard of excellence by which their 18 brother legions were measured. They were perfect. And in that perfection, in that cold, logical, and unyielding pride, the first microscopic cracks were beginning to form. The fate of the First Legion was not sealed in the cold vacuum of interstellar space, nor on some far-flung, blood-soaked world. It was forged decades earlier in the deep, shadow-haunted forests of their home world Caliban. To understand the schism that would shatter a legion, one must first understand the bond and the eventual breaking of the two men at its heart. Before the Primarch, there was the man, and before the Lion, there was Luther. Caliban was a world of savage beauty, a feudal death world where enormous, warp-tainted beasts roamed forests steeped in a perpetual twilight. Humanity survived in fortified monasteries, stone bastions of civilization against the encroaching, clawing wilderness. From this crucible of conflict arose knightly orders, brotherhoods of warriors, who dedicated their lives to hunting the great beasts. And among these knights, one man shone brighter than any other, Luther. He was not a demigod, but a man of exceptional vision, charisma, and martial skill. He possessed an ambition that at its inception was entirely noble: to unite the squabbling knightly orders, to purge the forests of their horrors, and to bring a lasting peace to the people of Caliban. He succeeded founding a new, all-encompassing brotherhood, known as the Order, with himself as its Grand Master. For a generation, Luther was the savior of his world. Then the forests gave up a secret. A wild man, a feral child who had survived for a decade alone, pitted against the very monsters that took entire knightly retinues to bring down. He was a being of pure instinctual combat, a prodigy of war. This was the being who would be named Lion L. Johnson. When Luther's knights finally cornered this wild man, it was not a capture, but a meeting of equals. In the wild man's eyes, Luther did not see a beast, but a keen, lonely intelligence. And in Luther, the Lion saw not a threat, but the first truly ordered human mind he had ever encountered. It was Luther who taught him to speak, who taught him the ways of men, who integrated him into the society of the Order. He gave the wild prodigy a name, a purpose, and a home. He gave him brotherhood. Together they were a force unlike any Caliban had ever seen. Luther's statesmanship and charismatic leadership, paired with the Lion's cold, inhumanly brilliant strategic mind and unmatched martial prowess, was the fulfillment of the Order's promise. They fought back-to-back, the two Lions of Caliban, one dark-haired and passionate, the other fair-haired and coldly reserved. They led the final crusades that cleansed Caliban of the last great beasts, ushering in a golden age of unity and prosperity. The bond between them was absolute, forged in the heat of battle and the shared dream of a peaceful world. Luther was not merely the Lion's mentor. He was his brother, his closest friend, his other half. This perfect, triumphant equilibrium was shattered by the arrival of a golden starship in the skies of Caliban. The coming of the Emperor changed everything. The revelation that the Lion was no mere mortal prodigy, but a Primarch, a genetically engineered son of the Master of Mankind, was a moment of profound awe for Caliban. For the lion, it was the answer to the questions of his own solitary existence. For Luther, it was the beginning of a slow, creeping poison. Overnight, the dynamic of their relationship was irrevocably altered. The lion, by sheer dint of his birthright, was now master of not just the Order, but the entire First Legion of the Adeptus Astartes. Luther, the celebrated Grand Master, the savior of his world, was now his second in command. It was not a demotion born of malice or intent. It was simply a fact of the new galactic reality. A Primarch leads, a mortal man follows. The lion, ever pragmatic and focused on the greater mission of the Crusade, may not have even registered the subtle shift, but for Luther, it was a constant grating reminder of his own limitations. The poison was one of pride. Luther had raised the lion. He had shaped the wild man into a knight. He had fought by his side and bled for their shared dream. Yet now, when the knights of the Order, their brothers in arms, looked upon them, their eyes held a new kind of reverence, one reserved only for the demigod son of the Emperor. Luther stood in the lion's shadow, a shadow that grew longer and colder with every new victory in the Great Crusade. The whispers began, in the quiet moments, a bitter thought here, a resentful glance there. At a war council, a tactical suggestion by Luther, once the final word on Caliban, would be acknowledged and then superseded by one of the lion's effortlessly brilliant galaxy-spanning strategies. While the Emperor conferred with his newfound son about the fate of star systems, Luther, the man who had built the very foundations of the Lion's army, was left to manage the logistics of recruitment. Each instance was a small cut, insignificant on its own, but together they bled his pride dry. He loved his friend, his brother, with all his heart, but a dark, resentful part of him began to hate the Primarch who had taken his place, the demigod who had eclipsed the man. The bond that had unified a world was beginning to fray, and in that tiny, imperceptible fracture, the ruinous powers of the galaxy saw their opportunity. The growing chasm between the lion and Luther was a strategic liability, a flaw in the otherwise perfect war machine of the First Legion. And the lion, a being of cold, hard logic, dealt with liabilities in the only way he knew how, by removing them. He was not blind to Luther's simmering resentment, to the dark moods and the quiet bitterness that clung to his oldest friend like a funeral shroud. But where a different Primarch might have sought reconciliation through counsel or confrontation, the lion saw only a tactical problem requiring a tactical solution. He lacked the emotional language to mend a broken brotherhood, so he chose instead to quarantine the perceived infection. His solution would prove to be the single most catastrophic decision in his long and storied life. The Order, when it came, was presented not as an exile, but as an honor. The lion assembled Luther and a great host of the Legion's veterans, specifically those who had been Knights of the Order on Caliban before the coming of the Imperium. To these proud warriors, he spoke of the immense importance of their homeworld. He lauded their experience and wisdom, proclaiming that only they, the true sons of Caliban, could be trusted with the sacred duty of overseeing recruitment and training the next generation of the First Legion. It was a speech filled with praise and purpose, a masterful piece of rhetoric that cloaked a blade of ice. Luther and all the assembled veterans understood the unspoken truth immediately. They were being sidelined. They who had bled to conquer Caliban and then fought at the forefront of the Great Crusade were being sent to the rear to become glorified instructors and planetary governors. The glory, the real war, would be fought by others, by recruits from Terra and newer legionaries who had never even set foot in the dark forests of home. It was a gilded cage, an honorable banishment from the brotherhood of war. As Luther accepted the charge with a hollow smile and a formal bow, the final thread of kinship between himself and the lion was severed forever. Back on Caliban, the bitterness took root and festered. The world was pacified. The great wars were a generation past. For Luther and his warriors, there was no glory to be won, no great beasts to hunt, only the monotonous administrative tasks of governing a compliant world and the repetitive drills of training new aspirants. They were lions put in a zoo surrounded by memories of their former greatness. This enforced idleness and simmering resentment created the perfect environment for a more insidious enemy to make its move. Deep within the fortress monastery of Alduruk, the ancient citadel of the Order lay libraries filled with texts that predated the imperial truth. The knights had studied their monstrous enemies for centuries, and in doing so had collected forbidden lore on the nature of the warp, the very source of the beast's corruption. It was a library of damnation filled with knowledge the Emperor had sought to erase. Luther, hungry for any kind of power or knowledge that could elevate him beyond the shadow of the lion, immersed himself in these forbidden tomes. Here in the whispering pages and blasphemous diagrams, he did not find monstrous demons, but a far more subtle and seductive poison. The primordial truths of chaos spoke to his wounded pride. They told him that his jealousy was justified, that the lion was a tyrant, that the Emperor was a liar who kept true power from his sons. The whispers offered Luther a path to enlightenment, a power that would make him the lion's equal, even his superior. This corruption was a contagion. Luther began to share his newfound wisdom with his inner circle of exiled veterans. They too felt betrayed and abandoned their pride, wounded by the Primarch's decree. In the quiet halls of the monastery, a shadow government formed a secret society, bound by shared resentment and the study of the arcane. They nurtured their hatred for the lion and the distant, ungrateful Imperium he served. The seeds of heresy planted in the soil of a single man's envy were now being carefully watered with forbidden knowledge and fed by the collective bitterness of Caliban's finest forgotten warriors. The storm was gathering. The galaxy was burning. The Horus heresy. A civil war of unimaginable scale had reached its crescendo. The First Legion, having been mired in the Thramma's crusade against the Night Lords and delayed by the treacherous currents of the warp, raced for terror only to arrive too late. Horus was defeated. The Emperor was confined to the Golden Throne, and the dream of the Great Crusade lay in ashes. With grim hearts, the lion turned his fleet homeward to Caliban, a place to heal, to regroup, and to reckon with the new, broken reality of the Imperium. As their warships translated from the warp into their home system, they broadcast the traditional codes of recognition, expecting the solemn but certain welcome of their brothers. The response they received was not a greeting, but a declaration of war. From the surface of Caliban, the planetary defense batteries, the very cannons they had helped construct, opened fire. Lances of pure energy, white-hot and blinding, tore into the loyalist fleet. On the bridge of his flagship, the invincible Reason the Lion watched in cold, silent fury as the icons of his own vessels turned from green to red. The shock quickly gave way to a chilling certainty. The seeds of heresy planted in his own flawed decision years ago had borne the bitterest of fruit. The betrayal was complete. There was no room for negotiation, no time for mercy. This was a cancer that had to be excised. The lion led the assault, personally bypassing the raging void battle and teleporting with the Terminators of the Deathwing directly into the heart of the enemy stronghold, the ancient fortress monastery of Alduruk. The fighting in those hallowed halls was the heresy in microcosm, a uniquely intimate and tragic form of warfare. Brother fought brother. The faces under the traitor helms were not anonymous heretics, but men they had trained with men with whom they had shared blood and victory on 100 worlds. Now those same faces were twisted by the corrupting energies of the warp and a decade of nurtured hatred. The air rang with the clash of power swords and the roar of bolters, a symphony of fratricide. The lion moved through the battle like the angel of death, his every blow a sentence, his expression an unreadable mask of granite, as he carved a path towards the source of the corruption, to the duel he knew was inevitable. In the grand chamber at the heart of the monastery, Luther waited. He was no longer just the aging, bitter knight. The power of the Chaos Gods flowed through him, elevating his mortal form to match the might of a Primarch. When the lion entered the chamber, he faced not his old friend but a demigod of ruin. Their duel was a storm that shook the very foundations of the mountain. It was a battle not only of flesh and steel, but of spirit and ideology. Traitor the lion roared his blade, a blur of emerald light. "You have broken every oath we ever swore." Luther met the blow with a strength born of damnation, his voice a venomous retort. "You abandoned us, you left us to rot, while you claimed all the glory. It is the Emperor who is the tyrant, and you are his blind executioner." Each blow they exchanged shattered stone columns. Each parry sent sparks flying like newborn stars. This was not a battle between strangers, but a violent, explosive release of a decade of resentment, misunderstanding, and broken brotherhood. Every move was layered with the memory of their shared past, now weaponized into a tool of destruction. The battle reached its terrible climax. The lion's superior skill finally overcame Luther's raw, chaotic power. He disarmed his old friend, his lion sword, at Luther's throat. But in that final, critical moment, he hesitated. Looking into the eyes of the man who had been his brother, his father, his first and only friend, he could not deliver the killing blow. That flicker of sentiment was a fatal error. Luther, channeling a final desperate surge of warp energy, unleashed a torrent of psychic force that struck the lion with the power of a thunderbolt. The Primarch, his formidable armor cracking, was thrown across the chamber, mortally wounded. He lay broken at Luther's feet. But as Luther stood victorious over his fallen brother, the sight of what he had done of the magnificent being he had laid low shattered the veil of chaotic delusion. The raw power receded, leaving only a broken man horrified by his own actions. He had not liberated Caliban. He had damned it. He had not proven himself the lion's equal. He had murdered him in a fit of prideful rage. A cry of pure, soul-shattering anguish tore from his lips, an agony of regret so profound it echoed in the warp. The Chaos Gods, who had fueled Luther's rebellion, were enraged by this sudden, genuine repentance. They had been denied their final prize, the corruption and enslavement of a Primarch's soul. In their divine fury, they lashed out. The sky above Caliban ripped open. A warp storm of impossible scale and violence descended, a vortex of raw immaterium that engulfed the entire world. The planet's crust buckled and tore apart. The very fabric of reality unraveled. Luther's traitorous legions caught in the maelstrom were sucked into the warp, scattered across the galaxy, and flung through the currents of time itself to reappear randomly over the next 10 millennia. They were no longer dark angels. They were the fallen. Caliban was annihilated, but the great monastery of Aldoruk, protected by ancient and powerful void shields, held together. It was torn from the dying planet's bedrock to become a new, mobile asteroid fortress. When the storm subsided, the surviving loyalists aboard the fleet descended into the ruins. They found no sign of the lion, only a gibbering, insane Luther, who spoke of small, green-robed creatures called the Watchers in the dark, taking the Primarch's body away. Faced with this incomprehensible disaster, their Primarch lost their homeworld destroyed, and half their legion branded as traitors. The surviving leaders made a pact. The truth could never be known. To the Imperium, they would report that Caliban was tragically destroyed by the orbital bombardment of the heretics. And in the shadows they swore a new, secret oath. They would rebuild their legion. They would hunt every last one of the fallen to the furthest corners of the galaxy. They would force them to confess, to repent, and in so doing they would one day, however long it took, erase the terrible shame that had been born in this final, fiery moment of betrayal. The hunt had begun. In the wake of Horus's rebellion, the Imperium was a wounded beast licking its wounds and staring suspiciously at the very saviors who had once been its greatest pride. The Space Marine Legion's instruments of unification had proven to be a double-edged sword capable of carving out an empire or cutting it in two. To prevent such a catastrophic civil war from ever happening again, the resurrected Primarch Robut Guilliman penned the Codex Astartes, a monumental tome of military doctrine whose most sweeping decree was the breaking of the legions. No single commander would ever again hold power over 100,000 Space Marines. The legions were to be divided into smaller, self-contained chapters of 1,000 warriors, their power forever checked and balanced. For the shattered remnants of the First Legion adrift on their new asteroid fortress home, this decree presented an existential threat. Their secret vow, the oath to hunt the fallen sworn in the ashes of Caliban, required unity, a singular purpose, and a coordinated effort across the entire galaxy. How could they conduct their eternal hunt if their strength was scattered, their command structure dismantled? Publicly, the Dark Angels complied with their typical solemn grace. As the First Legion, they were expected to set an example, and so they did. The Great Legion was officially disbanded in the event known as the Second Founding. From its ranks, new chapters were born, each with its own name, heraldry, and colors. The Angels of Vengeance, clad in foreboding black, embodied the grim determination of their quest. The Angels of Redemption adopted a scheme divided between bone white and dark green, representing their schizoid existence of public honor and private shame. The Guardians of the Covenant, the Consecrators, and dozens more took their place in the Imperial roles. To the High Lords of Terror, to the Inquisition, and to their brother Space Marines, it appeared that the First Legion was no more its legacy, and power honorably diffused across its many successors exactly as the Codex Astartes intended. The deception was perfect, but this was a lie. A masterful 10,000-year deception that allowed the First Legion to survive in spirit, if not in name. For while these chapters operated independently in their day-to-day duties, they were all secretly bound to the same ancient oath, members of a clandestine brotherhood, known only by a single telling name, the Unforgiven. This name was the truth of their existence. They had not forgiven their betrayed brethren for their treason, but more importantly, on a deeper, more fundamental level, they had never forgiven themselves. They had failed to stop the betrayal, failed to save their Primarch, failed their homeworld. Their shame was the glue that bound them together more tightly than any Legion command structure ever could. The Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels chapter was no mere chapter master. He was the hidden leader of this scattered legion, his authority absolute among all who shared the Lion's gene seed. The chapter masters of the Angels of Vengeance, the Angels of Redemption, and all the others were not his equals, but his lieutenants. They shared intelligence through encrypted channels that bypassed the Adeptus Mechanicus. They held secret councils where information on the fallen was exchanged like sacred currency. Their primary mission was not, and never has been, the defense of the Imperium, though they performed this duty with grim efficiency to maintain their cover. Their true purpose, the one that supersedes all other orders and oaths, is the hunt. A successor chapter of the Unforgiven will abandon a vital campaign, sacrificing worlds and untold lives to answer a summons from a cousin chapter, if it means the capture of a single fallen. To the outside galaxy, they are a collection of disparate and aloof chapters. In the shadows, they remain one entity, a multi-headed hydra forever bound by shame and united in its single, all-consuming, eternal purpose: to maintain a lie for 10 millennia, especially one that could see their entire lineage declared excommunicate traitoris by the Inquisition, if ever exposed, requires a level of internal control and discipline that is almost unimaginable. While the outward command structure of the Dark Angels and their successors appears to follow the tenets of the Codex Astartes with company sergeants and battle brothers, this is merely a carefully constructed facade. Operating in parallel is a clandestine hierarchy, a true power structure based on the sole currency of truth. This is the inner circle. The average Dark Angel fighting in a battle or assault company knows nothing of the Fallen. He believes the official narrative that their homeworld was destroyed by traitors in a surprise attack at the end of the Horus Heresy, and that the chapter's hatred for all Chaos Space Marines is simply a righteous zeal. He serves loyally, unquestioningly believing himself to be a noble knight in the grand cause of the Imperium. But throughout a warrior's career, he is being watched. His actions are recorded and analyzed by his superiors. They look not just for bravery or skill at arms, but for specific qualities, discretion, and unshakable loyalty to the chapter above the wider Imperium, and a certain capacity for ruthlessness. A warrior who displays these traits may find himself elevated to the second company, the Raven Wing. Here he is told a fraction of the truth, that there is a specific enemy the chapter hunts traitors from their own past. He is not told their name, nor the full story, but he is tasked with chasing down their trail to become the Hound in the chapter's eternal hunt. If he serves with distinction and keeps the secret perfectly, he may one day earn a place in the bone-white armor of the first company, the Deathwing. Upon his induction, he is told a near-complete version of the tragic tale of Luther's betrayal and the fall of Caliban. He learns of the Fallen. He is tasked with being the tip of the spear the shock trooper deployed to capture these phantoms. Yet even the revered veterans of the Deathwing do not know the entire truth. Only those who ascend to the highest echelons, the librarians, the interrogator chaplains, the company masters, and eventually the supreme Grand Master himself, are inducted into the final sanctum of power, the Inner Circle. To gain entry, one must pass through secretive rituals, where his loyalty is tested to its breaking point, and he must swear oaths that bind his very soul to the chapter's secret for eternity. Only then is the final, most damning piece of the puzzle revealed, not just the full story of Luther's betrayal, but the suspicion, the deeply held belief that their Primarch Lion L. Johnson may yet live, sleeping somewhere in the deepest, most hidden chamber of the rock. This is the greatest burden of all. To know this truth is a condemnation. The members of the Inner Circle are the loneliest men in the galaxy. They cannot share their fears or their doubts with anyone, not even their own battle brothers. They must live a double life, maintaining the appearance of honorable knights while ordering the most ruthless of actions in the shadows. They must weigh the price of their secret every single day, deciding if a world is worth sacrificing, an alliance worth betraying, just to keep the truth buried. This burden of knowledge erodes them, turning noble warriors into paranoid jailers forever shackled to their past. Their power is absolute, but it is the power of a warden guarding a tomb, a power defined not by what they command, but by what they conceal. A vow of vengeance sustained for 100 centuries cannot be enacted by will alone. It requires instruments honed and perfected for a singular, terrible purpose. While the Inner Circle dictates the strategy of the hunt, it is the elite formations of the chapter that serve as the bloody edge of its execution. The Raven Wing, the Deathwing, and the Interrogator Chaplains are the living trinity of the Unforgiven's secret war, a triumvirate of hunter, warrior, and confessor that has prosecuted their mission with chilling efficiency across the ages. Each is a master of its craft, a vital cog in the grim machinery of the hunt. First, there are the hunters. A black storm of roaring engines and displaced air, the second company, known as the Raven Wing, are the ever-searching eyes and ears of the chapter. Where other chapters use their fast attack elements for reconnaissance or flanking maneuvers, the Dark Angels have transformed theirs into a galaxy-spanning network of trackers and intelligence agents. Clad in sable armor, astride powerful bikes, or piloting sleek land speeders and aircraft, the warriors of the Raven Wing are masters of pursuit. They spend years, sometimes entire decades, on the trail of the faintest rumor. A whisper of a lone green-armored Astartes helping a hive world repel an orc invasion. A coded transmission intercepted from a rogue trader, mentioning a mysterious warrior of incredible skill. An archaeological find of pre-heresy First Legion equipment on a dead world. These are the ephemeral clues that the Raven Wing chase across the void. They are relentless, patient, and utterly dedicated, embodying the ceaseless nature of the chapter's quest. When a trail grows hot, they strike with lightning speed, not to destroy, but to corner their quarry, to fix them in place, and to broadcast a single coded message back to the rock. The hounds have found the scent. It is time to unleash the executioners. The call of the Ravenwing is answered by the silent, instantaneous fury of the Deathwing. The first company of the Dark Angels is comprised entirely of veterans clad in hulking Terminator armor, a sight awesome enough to break the morale of any foe. Yet their armor is not the traditional green of the chapter, but the stark, ghostly white of bleached bone. This funereal color scheme commemorates an ancient heroic last stand against a Genestealer infestation, but it has since taken on a new grim symbolism. The Deathwing are the ghosts who hunt ghosts. They are the chapter's incarnate wrath. When the signal comes, they do not travel by ship, but by teleportation, striking from the heavens like a bolt of judgment. Their mission is precise and brutal, to overwhelm all resistance and capture their fallen target alive. This is a task infinitely more difficult than a simple kill mission. It requires them to wade through the thickest of fire, to ignore their own casualties, and to engage in ferocious close-quarters battle to subdue a being with the strength and skill of a space marine, often one who has been further empowered by 10,000 years of experience or the dark gifts of chaos. Every member of the Deathwing knows the story of the betrayal, and they fight with a cold, contained fury, a personal rage against the traitors who brought shame upon their bloodline. They are the bone-white hammer that falls upon the prey, ensuring it cannot escape its final reckoning. Once a fallen is captured, they are taken back to the fleet or to the dungeons deep within the rock. Here the final act of the grim drama unfolds, and the third instrument of the hunt begins its holy work. The interrogator chaplains are the spiritual heart of the chapter, but in the context of the secret war, they are its torturers and its confessors. Clad in black armor, their faces hidden behind terrifying skull helms, they are the keepers of the chapter's soul and the purifiers of its shame. Their task is to extract a full confession from the captured fallen, to force them to renounce their ancient treason and beg for the Emperor's forgiveness. This is not a request. It is a demand, and it is achieved by any means necessary. The interrogator chaplains are masters of pain, both physical and psychic. They employ memory worms, agony inducers, chronoscourges, and raw, methodical torture over weeks, months, or even years. They peel back the layers of a fallen's mind, forcing them to relive their betrayal, to confront their sin, to break their will completely. The goal is not merely information, but the total spiritual destruction of the traitor. Only when the fallen is a broken, weeping shell begging for release is their repentance deemed complete. And then the interrogator chaplain grants them their final absolution, the Emperor's peace delivered by a crushing blow from their holy Crozius Arcanum. For the Dark Angels, this dark sacrament is a sacred duty, a necessary ritual to cleanse the Legion's soul, one captured traitor at a time. The Ravenwing finds the sin, the Deathwing binds it, and the interrogator chaplain purges it. This is the way it has been for 10,000 years. This is the way of the unforgiven. Honor to the Dark Angels is a concept that has become twisted over 10 millennia of self-imposed exile from the truth. The gleaming facade of the noble knight, the dutiful son of the Imperium, remains. But beneath it, the singular cancerous obsession with their past has forced them to commit acts that by any objective measure are deeply dishonorable. The hunt for the fallen is an absolute. It is a divine mandate that supersedes any oath, any alliance, and any strategic necessity. The Imperium is filled with the ghosts of those who have learned this lesson at the cost of their own lives. The price of the Dark Angel's secret is a debt paid in the blood of the innocent, and the loyal a stain upon their very soul that grows darker with every passing century. Imagine a scene, one that has played out countless times on forgotten battlefields across the galaxy. On the besieged world of Viridia, The trenches are filled with the mud-caked soldiers of the Astra Militarum, their lines stretched to the breaking point against a tide of green-skin fury. But morale is high, for fighting at their shoulder are the Angels of Death themselves, a company of the Dark Angels holding the critical flank with inhuman calm and devastating firepower. They are the anchor, the unbreachable wall against which the Orc horde is breaking. The Imperial Guard commander looks on with reverence, believing in the certainty of victory. Then a single encrypted burst of data arrives from a Ravenwing scout 3 systems away. A target has been sighted. Without a word of warning to their allies, without any explanation, the Dark Angels redeploy. Their Thunderhawks descend, extracting the Space Marines with cold precision, even as the battle rages around them. The Imperial commander watches in stunned disbelief as the flank he thought was invincible evaporates. The Orcs, sensing the weakness, pour through the gap. The line collapses into a chaotic rout. The battle is lost. Viridia falls. Millions die screaming curses at the Green Angels who abandoned them. In the official records of the Administratum, the event will be logged as a necessary strategic redeployment. But the surviving guardsmen will whisper the truth in barracks and bars. For the rest of their short lives, the unforgiven cannot be trusted. This ruthless calculus extends beyond the battlefield. Even the most powerful institutions of the Imperium are not immune if they stray too close to the truth. Consider Inquisitor Gerald Vogt of the Ordo Hereticus, a brilliant and ambitious man who noticed a pattern of inconsistencies in the First Legion's records spanning centuries. He saw the abandoned war zones, the redacted mission logs, the unnerving refusal to allow outsiders into the deeper archives of the Rock. Driven by duty, he began to investigate the myths surrounding the destruction of Caliban. His quest eventually led him under an inquisitorial seal to the Rock itself. The reception he received from the inner circle was perfectly cordial and utterly chilling. He was met with polite deflections, labyrinthine answers, and veiled warnings disguised as ancient chapter wisdom. In the final meeting, emboldened by his authority, Vogt asked a single pointed question about Luther, a name he had unearthed from a prescribed text. The air in the chamber grew cold enough to freeze blood. The Supreme Grand Master simply smiled a thin, predatory expression and assured the Inquisitor his questions would be given the fullest consideration. Days later, the Inquisitor's vessel, the Light of Truth, was reported lost with all hands after suffering a catastrophic Geller field failure shortly after leaving the Caliban system. No wreckage was ever found. The message was clear: there is no authority in the Imperium that the Dark Angels will not defy, no agent they will not silence to protect their shame. Perhaps the most damning illustration of their obsession is their willingness to turn their guns on their fellow Astartes. During the calamitous Month of Shame incident, the Dark Angels' hunt for a single fallen operative became entangled with the Grey Knights' hunt for the demon Primarch Angron. The Grey Knights, the most specialized and secretive of all chapters, demanded jurisdiction. The Dark Angels, whose entire existence was defined by their own secret, refused. Their missions were incompatible. The Grey Knights sought banishment, the Dark Angels required live capture. The standoff escalated, drawing in the ever-rivalrous Space Wolves. In the cold void of space, the unthinkable happened. Brother turned against brother. Dark Angels' vessels fired upon the ships of the Inquisition and the Sons of Russ. It was not a war of annihilation, but a brutal, stubborn, and heretical conflict born from irreconcilable duties. The Dark Angels ultimately secured their target and vanished, leaving behind a shattered alliance and a legacy of bitter enmity. This single event proved beyond any doubt the terrible truth of their condition. Their loyalty is not to the Imperium. It is not to their brother Astartes. It is not even to the war against the great enemy. Their ultimate loyalty is to their own 10,000-year-old wound, and they will burn the galaxy to prevent anyone from touching it. To the inner circle, the fallen are a monolithic concept, a singular, unforgivable sin that must be purged from the galaxy. They are the traitor, the heretic, the ghost at the feast. But 10,000 years is an eternity. The warriors who were ripped from Caliban and scattered through time and space did not remain a unified force. They are a diaspora, a collection of lost souls whose individual fates are as varied as the stars themselves. To call them all traitors is to simplify a truth that is soaked in tragedy, damnation, and for some, a desperate and unattainable desire for redemption. They are not one entity but a fractured mirror reflecting the many paths a son of the lion could walk. There are those who unquestionably prove the dark angel's paranoia right. These are the damned. Consider the Chaos Lord Vorlag the Tainted, once a respected captain of the First Legion. Cast into the eye of terror, his bitterness and pride were nurtured by the dark gods. He saw the power they offered not as a corruption, but as a just reward for his superior vision. He traded his honor for strength, his brotherhood for demonic legions. Now his once proud green power armor is a canvas of blasphemy, warped and fused with demonic flesh, adorned with the profane sigil of Nurgle. He leads a warband known as the Putrid Lions, spreading plague and ruin across entire sectors. He is a true monster, a being of utter depravity, who revels in the heresy for which he was exiled. To the unforgiven fallen like Vorlag are the ultimate justification for their hunt. They are the confirmation of their fears, the living proof that no mercy can be shown, for the seed of Luther's sin can only blossom into damnation. But for every fallen who embraced the abyss, there are countless others who fled from it. Picture a man named Kalen living on the feudal fringe world of Oakhaven. To the local populace, he is a quiet, reclusive figure, a woodsman of uncanny skill and strength who guards their village from the great beasts that stalk the forests. They do not know that beneath his simple robes he still wears the scarred power armor of a First Legionary, or that he was once a young battle brother on Caliban who followed his captain's orders without fully grasping the politics of betrayal. When the warp storm took him, it cast him alone into an uncaring galaxy. Horrified by the chaos he witnessed, he chose a life of exile, a quiet penance for a sin he barely understood. He uses his skills not for conquest, but for protection, the last lingering ember of his knightly vows. But Kalen lives in constant terror. Every night he scans the stars, dreading the day he sees the telltale sign of a Space Marine strike cruiser. He knows that his unforgiven brothers will not see a penitent guardian. They will only see another traitor to be dragged back to the rock in chains. His existence poses the most uncomfortable question for the Dark Angels. Does a man like this truly deserve to be tortured and executed for the crime of being on the wrong side of a war 10,000 years ago? And then there is the ultimate enigma, the ghost who walks between all worlds, Cypher. He is the most infamous and least understood of all the fallen. His true name is long forgotten, his motives an impenetrable mystery. He is a whirlwind of rumor and contradiction, appearing and disappearing at will, sometimes aiding Imperial forces, sometimes fighting alongside heretics, but always for his own inscrutable purpose. His appearance is iconic. A hooded robe conceals most of his power armor, and he carries 2 archaic pistols, 1 bolt and 1 plasma, which he wields with inhuman skill. But it is the object strapped to his back that draws the most attention, a massive, ornate, 2-handed blade that is, by all accounts, the Lion Sword, the personal weapon of the Primarch himself. The theories surrounding Cypher are a source of constant panicked debate within the inner circle. Is he the greatest of all traitors, carrying a symbol of their shame as an open mockery? Or is he the ultimate penitent, undertaking a 10,000-year pilgrimage to reach Holy Terror and lay the sword before the Golden Throne, an act he believes could grant forgiveness for himself and all his lost brothers? He is the wild card, the loose thread that could unravel everything. Should he be captured, or worse, should he succeed in reaching the Emperor's palace, the darkest secret of the First Legion would finally be laid bare for all the Imperium to see. Cypher is more than just a fallen. He is the living embodiment of the Dark Angel's uncertain fate, a harbinger of either their final redemption or their ultimate damnation. The hunt is not a series of disconnected events, but a continuous flowing tapestry of obsession woven across the ages. Individual battles are merely threads. The true scale of the Dark Angel's private war can only be appreciated by following a single thread from beginning to end. The story of the hunt for Aramus the Artful, once a master of the marches in the First Legion, is one such tale, a microcosm of the Unforgiven's relentless dedication, a chase that spanned nearly 2 centuries and cost the lives of millions who had the misfortune of standing in its way. The first scent of the trail appeared not in a flash of bolter fire, but in the quiet, painstaking analysis of data logs captured after the Balholt Crusade. A Ravenwing scout attached to an Ordo Malleus kill team was sifting through the wreckage of a vanquished heretical fleet. Amidst the terabytes of blasphemous cant and logistical manifests, he found an anomaly. The tactical deployments of the enemy fleet showed a prescience and geometric perfection that was eerily familiar. The maneuvers matched the obscure doctrines of the Hexagrammaton, specifically the striking patterns of the First Legion's old Iron Wing formations. To anyone else, it was a historical curiosity. To the scout, it was the ghost of a signature. He cross-referenced the data with the Unforgiven's secret archives, a library of shame containing the names and specialties of every legionary who had been stationed on Caliban. The pattern was a perfect match for the known strategic profile of Aramus, a brilliant tactician whose trail had gone cold 700 years prior. After centuries of silence, the hunt was on once more. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game on a galactic scale. A full squadron of the Raven Wing from the Angels of Redemption chapter was tasked with the pursuit. They followed the faint data trail to the lawless Scylla sector, a haven for pirates and renegades. But Aramus was a master of evasion. For 80 years he led them on a frustrating chase through half the sector. They would arrive in a system where he was rumored to be operating, only to find he had left weeks prior, leaving behind a carefully orchestrated trap. On one occasion, a false lead drew them into the gravitational well of a dead star, forcing them to fight their way through a fleet of orc freebooters that Aramus had paid off with stolen archaeotech. On another, he leaked intelligence of their mission to a rival chapter. The Marines, malevolent, knowing their infamous belligerence, would cause a jurisdictional conflict that would delay the hunt for years. All the while, the Angels of Redemption neglected their sworn duties. 3 Imperial worlds in their designated patrol zone suffered devastating raids, their pleas for aid going unanswered because the chapter's finest hunters were wholly dedicated to their private war. Battle brothers grew old and died in the chase. New generations of Raven Wing bikers took up the mantle, inheriting the obsession with their oaths. The hunt for Aramus became a sacred duty, a legend whispered within the chapter's halls. After 172 years of relentless pursuit, Aramus, weary and low on resources, finally made a mistake. He sought sanctuary on the rogue moon of Xylos, a notorious pirate den, believing he could finally disappear amongst the lawless rabble. But the Unforgiven had been herding him for the last decade, subtly closing off all other avenues of escape. Xylos was not a refuge, it was the killing ground. The Ravenwing established a silent system-wide blockade, ensuring not even a single distress call could escape. Then, in the cold, silent dark, the trap was sprung. The emerald lightning of a teleportation strike flared into being not outside Aramus's fortress, but inside his central command chamber. The bone-white terminators of the Deathwing, drawn from the nearby Angels of Vengeance. Chapter in a display of the Unforgiven's seamless cooperation had arrived. The battle was short and savagely one-sided. Aramus's mercenary bodyguards were professionals, but they were mortals, fighting demigods of war. They were cut down in seconds. Aramus himself, clad in his ancient artificer armor, fought with the desperate skill of a cornered lion, his power sword clashing against lightning claws and thunder hammers. But he was 1 against 20, A storm bolter salvo tore through his leg, and the crushing impact of a thunderhammer to his helm sent him into darkness. He awoke in stasis cuffs, the familiar green and bone of his captors looming over him. The 172-year chase was over. As the Unforgiven fleet vanished from the Xylos system without a trace, Aramis began his final journey, a silent voyage back to the Rock, where the cells were cold and the interrogator chaplains were patient. Every obsession needs a focal point, a physical anchor to which it can be chained. For the Dark Angels, that anchor is the Rock. It is far more than a mobile fortress monastery. It is the largest surviving piece of their shattered homeworld, a colossal shard of Caliban's bedrock, a wandering tombstone for a world that is no more. For 10,000 years it has been their sanctuary, their command center, and their most sacred shrine. But it is also a prison for the captured fallen who languish in its depths, a prison for the secrets it is forced to keep, and a prison for the very soul of the Unforgiven, forever binding them to the tragedy that created it. The Rock is the physical embodiment of their shame, a constant floating reminder of their failure. To walk its halls is to be immersed in an atmosphere of oppressive solemnity. The architecture is a brutal, soaring Gothic with vaulted ceilings so high that they seem to consume both light and sound, creating a perpetual state of twilight. The air is cold and still carrying the ancient scent of petrified stone, burning incense, and the faint metallic tang of ozone from the fortress's power cores. There are no boisterous victory celebrations here, only the endless echoing drone of liturgical chants from unseen chapels and the measured tread of armored boots on stone floors. The walls are lined not with triumphant statues of conquering heroes, but with grim, cowled sentinels and stern, unforgiving angels carved from obsidian. Great tapestries depict glorious battles, yet the faces of the Dark Angels woven into them are never joyous, always stoic and mournful. It is a place of eternal vigilance, not of glory. Every corridor seems to whisper the tale of Luther's betrayal. Every shadow seems to conceal a watchful, judgmental eye. The Rock is not a home. It is a mausoleum, and its inhabitants are the ever-watchful guardians of a 10,000-year-old grave. But the true nature of the Rock, its darkest purpose, lies deep within its core, far below the reclusium, and the armory's down winding passages hewn from the raw living stone of old Caliban. Here in the gut of the asteroid are the dungeons. These are not mere holding cells, but arcane chambers of torment and containment, their walls inscribed with powerful wards that nullify psychic powers and drain the will of those interred within. This is the final destination of the hunt. It is here that the captured fallen are brought to face the interrogator chaplains. The silence in these corridors is profound, broken only by the maddeningly slow drip of water, the low hum of stasis fields, and the occasional blood-curdling scream of a soul being forcibly purified. This is the heart of the Unforgiven's obsession, the abattoir, where they butcher their own past in the desperate hope of creating a cleaner future. Yet even these horrific dungeons are not the final secret. Deeper still, in a chamber known only to the Supreme Grand Master and a handful of his most trusted confidants, lies the ultimate truth. This final sanctum is not a cell, but a crypt sealed by technology and esoteric energies that defy comprehension. Standing as silent, eternal sentinels before its gate are the Watchers in the Dark, the diminutive robed and cowled beings native to ancient Caliban, whose motives and nature remain a mystery. Inside this chamber, bathed in the soft green glow of slumbering machinery, lies a figure of mythic proportions. Clad in Baroque emerald green power armor, his noble face serene in a sleep that has lasted for 100 centuries, is Lion L. Johnson, Primarch of the First Legion. He is not dead, but wounded, and healing held in a state of suspended animation by the Watchers and their ancient technology. This is the secret upon which all others are built. The frenzied hunt for the fallen is not just about erasing their shame, but about purifying the Legion to make themselves worthy of their father's forgiveness when he finally awakens. The rock is not just their fortress. It is the Primarch's life support machine. It is their greatest hope, and therefore their eternal prison, shackling them to this unending silent vigil until the day their sleeping king finally returns. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had been in a state of managed decay, a slow, grinding decline into darkness. Then, in a final, agonizing spasm, the fortress world of Cadia fell. The sky broke. The galaxy was torn in half. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the great rift, erupted across the length of the Segmentum Obscurus, a permanent swirling tempest of raw warp energy that plunged half the Imperium into a new dark age. Worlds that had stood for millennia were devoured by demonic hordes. Astropathic communication became a scream of madness. The light of the Astronomicon was hidden behind a veil of raw chaos. For the first time in 10 millennia, the Imperium was truly catastrophically broken. For the unforgiven, this new, desperate era stretched their resources and their secrecy to the absolute breaking point. The demands on them were greater than ever before. Worlds screamed for salvation from the demonic tides, and the dark angels and their successors answered the call with their grim, cold efficiency. They fought on 1,000 fronts, their fleets navigating the treacherous new warp currents, their battle brothers holding the line against horrors that defied sanity. Yet even as the galaxy burned around them, even as the Imperium itself teetered on the brink of total collapse, the hunt did not cease. The Inner Circle, more paranoid than ever in this new age of chaos, pushed their chapters to redouble their efforts, fearing that in the anarchy the fallen would find new opportunities to sow discord, or that their own secrets might be exposed in the mayhem. They were a brotherhood stretched taut, fighting a public war against the demon and a private war against their own ghosts, the strain of their dual existence threatening to finally tear them apart. Into this crucible of fire and desperation came a shocking, unforeseen complication, a gift that was also a potential curse. The returned Primarch Robute Guilliman had launched his Indomitus crusade to reclaim the lost half of the Imperium, and at his command was a new generation of warrior, the Primaris Space Marines. Created by the arcane genius of Archmagos Belisarius Karl, these warriors were stronger, faster, and more resilient than their predecessors. Reinforcements were sent to every loyal chapter the Dark Angels included. To the Imperium, it was a miracle. To the Inner Circle of the Unforgiven, it was a crisis of faith and security. Their entire system of indoctrination, the slow, meticulous process of vetting a battle brother over a lifetime of service before entrusting him with even a fraction of the truth, was rendered obsolete. These Primaris Marines arrived as fully formed warriors, their loyalty sworn to the Imperium and the Lord Commander Guilliman, not to the specific secret culture of the Rock. They had not been raised on the stories of Caliban's glory, nor had they been steeped in the quiet mourning and paranoia that defined the chapter's soul. They were outsiders, a foreign element introduced into a closed, hermetic system. The Inner Circle was faced with a terrible dilemma. How could they integrate these new brethren? To refuse the Primarch's gift would be to invite suspicion and censure they could not afford. But to accept them meant allowing unknown, untested elements into their ranks. Could a Primaris Marine ever be trusted to join the Raven Wing? Could one ever wear the bone-white armor of the Deathwing? Could they ever be told the truth? A new wall of secrecy was erected within the chapter, a division between the Firstborn and the Primaris, a source of internal friction and suspicion that threatened to crack the very foundations of the Unforgiven, just as the greatest trial of their existence was about to begin. While the Unforgiven grappled with the crisis of the Primaris and the chaos of a bisected galaxy, their ancient home began to stir, as if from a long and troubled dream. For millennia, the Rock had been a place of cold, static silence, But now strange phenomena began to manifest in its deepest, most forbidden corridors. Ancient machinery dormant since the age of strife hummed to life with a low, resonant thrum. The librarians of the chapter were plagued by powerful psychic visions, not of the future or the past, but of a singular colossal consciousness stirring in the heart of their fortress, a mind of immense power and sorrow, like a caged leviathan waking from an eon of slumber. Most unnervingly, the watchers in the dark, the enigmatic and diminutive natives of Caliban, began to emerge from the shadows. No longer fleeting, half-seen figures, they now walked the halls with a clear and urgent purpose, their cowled heads turned towards the chapter's masters, their silent presence an undeniable summons. The rock itself knew. The vigil was ending. Its master was returning. Supreme Grand Master Azrael, accompanied by the highest-ranking members of the Inner Circle, the keepers of the final, ultimate secret, followed the silent procession of watchers. They were led down into the very heart of the asteroid, to the sealed, hidden chamber that few had ever seen, but all knew existed. It was the sanctum of the Lion, the final hope, and the heaviest burden of their order. As they entered, the soft green glow of the stasis field that had bathed the chamber for 10,000 years began to flicker. With a final sighing hiss of ancient atmospherics, the field died. The air grew thick with the scent of ages. On the central plinth, the armored figure stirred. A single finger twitched. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the First Legion, the Son of the Forest, opened his eyes. This was not the glorious, triumphant return the legends had foretold. The being who sat up was not the golden, unblemished warrior king of the Great Crusade. This was an older, more weathered figure. His hair, once the color of spun gold, was now long, wild, and streaked with gray. His face was lined with a profound weariness, the face of a man who had not been resting, but wrestling with his own ghosts in the dark for 100 centuries. He was not a shining paladin, but a grim, tired knight who had seen the abyss and carried its shadow in his eyes. He was the old lion, the Primarch of a broken Imperium, and his gaze held not the fire of conquest, but the cold, hard light of grim necessity and deep, ancient sorrow. He rose from his slab, the joints of his legendary armor groaning in protest, and turned to face his sons. In that moment, the leaders of the Unforgiven, the most powerful and feared men in their entire lineage, felt a terror that eclipsed any battlefield horror. Before them stood their living creator, their genetic father, the very reason for their existence. They stood ready to receive his commands, to bask in the glory of his return. But the lion did not see a chapter of honorable knights who had faithfully guarded his legacy. He looked at Azrael, at the Grand Masters, and the revered interrogator chaplains, and his piercing gaze saw past the titles and the honorifics. He saw the truth in their souls. He saw not crusaders, but jailers. He saw not pride, but a corrosive, deeply ingrained shame. He saw the paranoia that had twisted his legion from a shining sword of the Imperium into a clandestine order of secret keepers obsessed with the shadows of the past. And in their eyes, he saw the reflection of his own failure. He said nothing. He simply looked at them, and his profound, disappointed silence was a judgment more absolute and more terrifying than any roar of anger could ever have been. The hope that had sustained them for 10,000 years died in that moment, replaced by the chilling dread of a long-overdue reckoning. The father had come home, and he had found his house to be a prison. The lion did not wait for his sons to present their carefully curated reports and sanitized histories. He was a creature of the hunt, a being of instinct, and he could smell the rot that had infested the soul of his legion. In the days following his awakening, he walked the cold halls of the rock, not as a king returning to his throne, but as a silent predator stalking the scent of decay. His presence was a suffocating pressure. His silence was an accusation that left the members of the Inner Circle trembling in his wake. He sought the truth for himself, and his instincts drew him downward, ever downward into the fortress's gut, towards the source of the psychic pain that stained the very stones of his home. Without a word, he bypassed the honor guards and ancient seals, his authority, absolute and unquestioned. He descended into the dungeons, a place he had never known to exist, and was guided by the faint, agonized screams to a specific interrogation chamber. He entered to a scene of grotesque ritual. A captive, his green power armor shattered and blackened, was chained to a cold rock wall, his body a canvas of ritualistic torture. Before him stood an interrogator chaplain, his skull helm a mask of cold piety, his crozius crackling with energy as he prepared to administer another round of purification. The air was thick with the stench of blood ozone and the fanatical zeal of a torturer convinced of his own righteousness. The chaplain froze, his arm raised as the Primarch filled the doorway. The lion's gaze swept over the scene, the broken fallen, the instruments of pain, the zealous chaplain, and his weary expression hardened into one of cold, simmering fury. This was not the grim justice of a warrior. It was the obsessive, cruel work of a zealot. It was a perversion of everything the First Legion was meant to be. Cease, he commanded, his voice a low growl raspy from 10 millennia of disuse, but cracking with the authority of a demigod. You are not a giver of repentance. You are a butcher of souls. His disgust was palpable. This secret, shameful ritual was not cleansing the Legion. It was poisoning it, turning his knights into the very monsters they claimed to hunt. Shortly thereafter, the Lion convened the entirety of the inner circle in the highest strategic chamber of the rock. The masters of the Unforgiven gathered, their hearts heavy with dread. They expected a castigation, a purge of their ranks, a full accounting of their sins. They were not prepared for the reality of his judgment. The Lion stood before them, not in the regal robes of a monarch, but in his scarred and battered war plate, the living embodiment of the war they had forgotten how to fight. When he spoke, his voice did not roar with anger, but cut through the silence with the cold finality of a headsman's axe. "The hunt is over," he declared. The words struck the assembled masters like a physical blow. "For 10,000 years you have chased the ghosts of my failure while the Imperium burned. You have sacrificed allies, worlds, and your own honor in pursuit of a secret that has rotted you from within. You have become wardens of a prison, not warriors of the Imperium. This ends now." He decreed that all resources, all fleets, all personnel dedicated to the clandestine hunt for the fallen were to be immediately reassigned. They knew their only priority was the defense of the Imperium Nihilus. The Unforgiven would fight the real enemy, the forces of chaos, the alien, the heretic, not the pathetic, scattered remnants of their own broken past. The reaction was one of stunned, horrified silence, which quickly curdled into a schism that split the inner circle in two. For the hardliners, the zealots who had built their entire identity around the hunt, this was blasphemy. Their sacred 10,000-year vow, the very bedrock of their existence, had just been dismissed as a foolish obsession by the one being they were sworn to revere. It was a repudiation of their sacrifice, their purpose, their very souls. But for others, perhaps even Azrael himself, the Primarch's words were a bitter but necessary medicine. They were a release from a burden that had grown too heavy to bear a chance to finally become the heroes they pretended to be, rather than the paranoid secret keepers they were. The Lion had not returned to heal his legion. He had returned and shattered its foundations, casting aside their sacred traditions and leaving them adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Their ancient purpose was gone, and in its place, a new, deep and bitter division was born, a conflict not of loyalty, but of faith in the Father who had finally returned to judge them. The Lion's decree was not merely an ending, but a new and terrifying beginning. Having forbidden the hunt, he now took an even more radical step, one that would challenge the very soul of his sons. He did not seek to simply forget the fallen, he sought to reclaim them. Bypassing the rigid, paranoid structure of the inner circle, the lion began to use his own uncanny abilities, aided by the ever-present watchers in the dark, to track down his lost sons. But he came to them not as a vengeful god, but as a father. He sought out those who had lived in exile, not in damnation, those who had spent millennia in quiet penance, not in service to the ruinous powers. He found them one by one in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. These meetings were not interrogations, but reunions soaked in 10,000 years of sorrow and misunderstanding. In a secluded asteroid belt, he confronted a small band of his former knights who had become protectors of a remote flotilla of refugees. He looked them in the eye, warriors, now ancient and grey, and saw not the taint of heresy, but the deep, abiding loyalty to the Imperium that they had been forced to nurture in secret. He did not offer them the chaplain's brand of torturous forgiveness. He offered them a choice. They could continue their exile forever, running from a past that was not entirely of their own making, or they could rejoin their legion. They could take up their blades in his name once more and wash away the stain of their perceived sin with the blood of the Imperium's true enemies. He offered them not damnation, but a chance at redemption through service. Those who accepted this impossible offer, who knelt and renewed their oaths to their returned father, were given a new name. They were not fallen, nor were they yet dark angels. They were the risen. In a move that horrified the chapter's traditionalists, he allowed them to once again wear the black plate and winged sword of the original First Legion, a symbol of a past he was determined to reclaim, not erase. The existence of the Risen created an immediate and profoundly unstable situation within the ranks of the Unforgiven. On the war-torn world of Ormanthus, a battle company of dark angels found themselves deployed alongside a detachment of these Risen. The tension on the line was thicker than the enemy fire. A firstborn dark angel who had spent 3 centuries in the Raven Wing, hunting the very rumor of men like these, now had to trust his life to one. He saw a heretic who had escaped justice. The risen warrior, fighting with the grim determination of a man given a final impossible chance, saw in the dark angel's eyes the face of the torturer who would have condemned him without a trial. Every shared glance was an accusation, every command given or received was laced with 1,000 years of hatred and suspicion. The Primaris Marines, free from the indoctrination of the inner circle, viewed the situation with a logical, if wary, acceptance. But for the veterans, this alliance was an abomination, a betrayal of every sacrifice made since the destruction of Caliban. The lion had not healed the wound of his legion. He had ripped it open for all to see. The Unforgiven were now fractured along a new ideological fault line. On one side stood those who embraced their Primarch's command, who saw in the Risen a path to a future free from the shackles of their obsessive past. On the other stood the hardliners, the zealots of the inner circle, and the interrogator chaplains who whispered that the lion had gone soft, that his mercy was a foolish sentiment that spat on the graves of 10 millennia of loyalist martyrs. The shame of the Dark Angels was no longer a secret to be hidden, but an open, festering debate. The great question was no longer whether the Unforgiven could cleanse their honor by hunting the last of the fallen, but whether they would succumb to a new and final civil war, a war between the sons loyal to their father's future and those forever chained to their own unforgiving past. And so the lion walks among his sons once more. The return of a Primarch, a myth made manifest, should have been a moment of unequivocal triumph, a divine vindication for 10 millennia of lonely vigil. For the Dark Angels, it has been anything but. Lionel Johnson has not returned as a glorious savior to absolve his children of their sins and lead them into a golden age. He has returned as a quiet, weary, and deeply disappointed father, a figure of judgment who has held up a mirror to his legion, forcing them to gaze upon the monstrous reflection of what they have become. He has not brought them the comfort of forgiveness. He has brought them the agony of a reckoning. The great secret hunt, the singular purpose that has defined the Unforgiven for 100 centuries, is over. But the war, the true war for the soul of the First Legion, has only just begun. The shame that has haunted them for 10,000 years has not been erased. It has been transformed. For millennia, it was a simple, if terrible, burden. It was the shame of Luther's betrayal, the shame of the fallen. This external focus allowed them to maintain a twisted kind of self-righteousness. They were the wronged party, the loyal sons forced to clean up the mess of their traitorous kin. Every ruthless act, every abandoned ally, every murdered inquisitor could be justified as a grim necessity in service of this righteous secret crusade to restore their honor. But the lion, with his cold, discerning gaze and his radical acts of mercy, has stripped them of this comforting delusion. He has forced them to confront a new, more intimate, and far more corrosive shame their own. The shame of their paranoia. The shame of their cruelty. The shame of 10,000 years of lies, atrocities, and betrayals committed not by Luther, but by them in the hollow name of preserving an honor they themselves were actively tarnishing. The enemy is no longer a distant, shadowy fallen, hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy. The enemy is now the reflection in the polished black eye lens of their brother's helmet. This has created a schism far deeper than the mere division between Firstborn and Primaris. A quiet civil war now brews in the cold halls of the Rock and across the fleets of the Unforgiven. It is a war of ideology, a conflict of faith. On one side are those who cling to the old ways, the hardliners and zealots of the inner circle, who see the lion's mercy as a weakness and the inclusion of the risen as a blasphemy against their 10 millennia of sacrifice. They are the keepers of the grudge, the wardens who have guarded their prison of secrets for so long they have forgotten any other way of life. On the other side are those who have embraced their Primarch's new decree, who see a chance for true absolution, a path to finally becoming the noble knights they have only ever pretended to be. And caught between them is the vast, uncertain majority warriors, torn between the sacred dogma that has defined their entire existence and the undeniable living command of their own Primarch. The paranoia that was once directed outward is now turned inward. Brother eyes brother with suspicion, questioning not his loyalty to the Emperor, but his allegiance in this new internal struggle. The lion stands at the center of this storm, a figure as grim and uncertain as the era itself. He is not the glorious warrior king of the Great Crusade, but the old lion, the knight of nihility, a being perfectly suited to this age of galactic twilight. He has broken the chains of the past, but he has offered no easy path for the future. He has forced his sons to walk a razor's edge between redemption and self-destruction. The galaxy burns, the forces of chaos are ascendant, and the Imperium needs the full, undivided strength of the First Legion. But the Sons of the Lion are more divided now than they have been at any point since the shells first rained down upon Caliban. Their greatest test will not be on some alien battlefield, but in the quiet chambers of their own hearts. Can they learn to forgive? Not just the fallen, but themselves. Can they let go of the shame that has been both their poison and their purpose for so long? The final unanswered question hangs heavy in the suffocating air of the 41st millennium. Has Lionel Johnson returned to save his sons from themselves, to reforge them in the fires of the Indomitus Crusade, into the shining blade the Imperium so desperately needs? Or has he, the master of tragedy and flawed decisions, returned only to bear witness to their final agonizing collapse, to watch as the First Legion, his first and greatest pride, is at last consumed, not by an external foe, but by the crushing, inescapable weight of its own dark and unforgivable legacy? The hunt is over, but the judgment has just begun.